If you joined us for a prior session with Mateus, thank you so much. In case you missed our first session and you missed a bit of the brief introduction, I'm Hannah Holmes. I'm the program director at PLEAC. It's wonderful to have all of you here today to explore the question, digital first or people first? How does the digital divide affect public legal education work? Again, we're incredibly grateful to all of our moderators, our panelists, our participants for making this event possible. And while we are meeting virtually from across the country, I am joining you from Toronto, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. So I do want to encourage everyone, please use the chat, use the Q&A function throughout the event to share comments, ask any questions, engage with one another. We definitely encourage it. We will, though, have some time at the end to answer any questions you may have. We have about 15 minutes or so, but we might be flexible with time. We might have a little more, a little less, but we'll do our best to get to everyone today. And please don't forget to answer the survey at the end of the session. We welcome any feedback to help improve our future events as well. So that'll pop up, and you might also get an email with one of those at a later point as well. So with that, I would like to introduce our second session titled Reaching People on Both Sides of the Divide. I'm delighted to introduce you to our moderator today, Baird Makinson, Executive Director of the Yukon Public Legal Education Association, and pass it over to Baird to get us started, introduce our speakers today, and kind of go from there. So thank you so much, Baird.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm really interested in what everybody has to say. I'm really excited to hear everyone's input. This is the topic I'm always interested in hearing more about. So here with Holly, Nora, and Jeff, maybe starting with Holly, and then Nora, and then Jeff could go through and have you guys introduce yourselves. Would that work?
Sure. I'm Holly Williams. I work in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador at the Labrador Friendship Centre. So anybody on the call that's familiar with what a friendship centre does, we do it in a little remote community. We're a bit different in rural and remote. We service all of Labrador. And I have been in this role for just a little over a year and happy to join the call and discuss our digital divide challenges and the way that we move forward through them.
Hi, I'm Nora. I'm coming from the traditional unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm the director for BC programs at the Justice Education Society of BC. We are a PLEI organization in BC. We run 10 different websites. We have a legal helpline. We do a lot of different legal education programs and projects. So I'm excited to talk to you today.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Surtees. I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Public Legal Education in Alberta. I'm sitting right now in Edmonton, Alberta. We are on Treaty 6 and 7 and a little bit of 8 in Alberta lands. And we've been here for 50 years doing public legal education. So happy to join in today and talk to you about this really important issue.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to try to speak up a little bit. I've got to know here that my voice is a bit muffled, so if I'm coming through louder than before, I apologize. So we talked about a few questions in advance. I guess the first question we talked about was whether you can tell me about the communities you serve, what their demographics are. For example, are they in remote areas? What the levels of digital literacy and digital access? Are there language barriers that exist? And how do you ensure that your public legal education materials reach your intended audience? I'm wondering, again, maybe if we start with Paul. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Holly, but you're first on my screen. I'll move off next time. I apologize.
No problem. So the communities that we serve, that's a loaded question, Jeff. Baird, sorry. We serve, like I mentioned, Labrador, so very remote and isolated in comparison to other areas. We have a large Indigenous population, and we're based, like I mentioned, in Happy Valley, Goose Bay. For all our Indigenous folks in Labrador, we service Indigenous folks that visit our area and also Indigenous allies that come through our doors. We don't turn anybody away, basically. Due to the remote nature of being in Labrador and essentially being seen as the heart of Labrador, we get folks from all over requesting our services. we offer an array of services, including the legal services that kind of loop me into this here today. But due to the remote nature, it is a bit of a challenge sometimes that we do face in providing them. So digital access is generally a challenge in our area because of the technicalities that follow. Often it's slow and frequently requiring support of services from IT, or the infrastructure just isn't available. And in more remote areas than Happy Valley Goose Bay, we see issues with inadequate infrastructure, which doesn't ever seem to go away, sadly. And then many of our communities don't have access to cell phone usage on the regular, so making it challenging to provide easy access to internet and digitalization. Additionally, another challenge that we face is a variation in our demographics, including the age of our clientele. And due to this, there has to be a level of engagement and support for them to access our services. One thing I'll note in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador is a huge aging population, and it doesn't seem that they are very technology savvy. Therefore, we've run into those challenges requiring that support one-on-one, hands-on for those clients. With our populations, there's a level of challenges in language and literacy, as mentioned. So to combat this, we find funding for translators to be present in the work that we do. We do find sometimes it presents challenges as well because, like I mentioned, we are in a remote area, so small town, and the confidentiality aspects that travel with that is also something that we try our best to support through. To eliminate some of the barriers that we focus on, we include support of people on the ground. We travel to the more remote communities to bridge the connection to legal services. For example, we got a legal clinic coming up in the most northern community in Labrador, and that is being planned right now. It's a lot of work to get there, but it's also very rewarding once we're there. So again, we go with a lawyer and then connect them to the community. One thing we do make sure in these connections that we're providing legal services with a cultural safety aspect involved, being sure that the folks that we're working with and providing the legal advisement is either Indigenous themselves, so they understand the history, or they're allies in that and it aims to, I guess, support a level of reconciliation. We also rely on our elders and knowledge keepers in the communities to allow us to connect to spread our whereabouts in the community. We utilize other methods of media like the radio channel. That seems to be a prominent way to get the word out. And lastly, the tried and true small town talk helps us when we venture into the communities, which always isn't the best, but it supports us in what we're doing. People want to know who's on the plane and what they're doing there, and word travels fast. In terms of providing support in legal materials, we do provide support through the Justice Navigator. We link clients that come through our doors to Public Legal Information Association of Newfoundland and Labrador. They actually have a local office that's just happened in the last few years, so it's nice to have some familiarity to their faces as well. And again, we link clients for legal advisement, including lawyers that understand the community connections and the Indigenous histories.
Thanks so much, Margaret. It's just such an interesting geographical area to work in. It's really neat. Maybe Jeff, are you able to respond as well?
I can go next. CPLE, which is our acronym, Centre for Public Legal Education Alberta, we primarily serve communities across Alberta. Unlike some of the other plea organizations across the country, including Holly's, we don't have direct client access. We provide public legal information, but we don't act as a clinic in any way. And as I say, we serve primarily Alberta. We do have some materials for charities, including one website that are valuable for use right across the whole country. But mostly we serve Albertans first. Let me tell you a little bit about Alberta, if you don't already know. Alberta's culture is often characterized by media as some variation of the right-wing Marlboro man sitting on a horse, sucking on a piece of straw. And those guys are here. But in reality, Alberta is a very, very diverse population. We've got roughly 5 million people in the province, and we look at all of those people as potential users of our resources. 81% of Albertans live in urban areas of more than 1,000 people. 75% of the entire population of the province lives in the Edmonton-Calgary corridor, a road about 300 kilometers long that's near and dear to my heart. And fun fact, I mean, most of us have big provinces in Canada but sometimes it's mind-boggling when you think about it. Edmonton, where I'm sitting right now, is 600 kilometers from the nearest crossing point into the United States. We're 1,200 kilometers from the Northwest Territories. So there's a lot of big spaces, a lot of empty land. Most Albertans claim European heritage of some variety, about 65%. The other biggest groups in the province that we have to serve are South Asian, 7%, Chinese, 4%, Filipino, 5%, First Nations at 3.5%, Métis at 3%. So English is the mother tongue, the first language learned for about 77% of Albertans, and others, of course, less than that. So as far as internet access goes in Alberta, 2022 data shows that only 33%, it's the rural areas that are the problems in Alberta as far as access goes. Only 33% of Alberta's rural population has high-speed internet access, and 20% of Indigenous communities have high-speed access. We have, our government has put in place a program to try to address this, spending about $70 million a year for the next couple of years, trying to bring access to rural communities. So that's a solution on the hardware end of things, bringing service to more and more communities. And there's also recent development of some satellite technologies like Starlink and that for people that can afford those things. The other side, on the people end of things in Alberta, what are people's skills and abilities with respect to accessing the kind of materials we provide online? We have some information about that. Not complete information. It used to be said that seniors had low competency online. What we believe is that's less true now than before. Still not perfect, but many people who are in the senior category now have spent entire careers working on computers. So, and phones in Alberta, phones are almost ubiquitous. Not quite, but most people do have phones. The way we are in our planning, we sort of accept as a given that there's going to be a subpopulation of people who can't access our resources online. So we're I would say digital first, but not digital only. We still produce and distribute about 30,000 print documents each year through various channels. So that's a bit of a snapshot of Alberta and what we're doing.
Thanks, Jeff. I like that distinction between like digital first but not digital only. That is probably a approach to we're using as well. Nora, are you able to speak as well to that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for our demographics or the populations we serve, it's a little bit different for different projects. We have our PLEI websites, and then our Ask Jess legal helpline. So those are sort of generally targeted to the public. It's mostly people who don't have lawyers, can't afford lawyers, or just starting out on their journey. With that service, we also have like phone and text service. So that reaches more remote locations where there might be barriers to internet, or even just people who have lower digital literacy rates. They can use the phone or text. Our legal education programs, they're delivered mostly our primary focuses are on youth, on newcomers or people with language barriers, Indigenous communities, and then we have like specific groups depending on projects that we have, where we had one where it was for early childhood educators. So it can be really focused on a specific group of individuals. What are some of the barriers they face? It's nothing new from what Holly and Jeff said. Really, it's like some of the remote communities is lack of internet, lack of digital literacy. I know Jeff mentioned seniors. It might like our perception is different now. They're not necessarily the ones that are struggling with digital literacy, but I think there's more and more studies, and Matthias in the session before ours had talked about youth as well, and how we think that they're so digitally savvy, but actually the way that they consume digital resources is different than the way maybe adults are doing it, and they're missing a lot of key information. So that's really where sometimes there is a divide of how we're presenting our digital resources. I think there's also like people with disabilities, so being really mindful of the way we set up our websites and our digital assets. And then, of course, language barriers. And I think the second part was like, how do we ensure that we're reaching these audiences? Well, we can't reach them all is the reality. But what we can do is like doing a lot of surveys and with users, doing needs assessments where we can, like working a lot with our partners. We don't send out print. It's just like a cost benefit thing, but we work with partners that have access to a printer, and they'll help their clients print out resources. So we ensure that our resources are printer friendly, or that they're developed so that they come out well. And then we have advisory committees, especially like youth advisory committees, because none of us are that young anymore. So that's always good to have.
Thanks, Nora. Something we talked about briefly is like, I think you mentioned you are designing like websites targeted to youth differently from websites targeted to adults. Is that?
That's true. We're just doing we're redesigning some of our websites right now, and the way youth are consuming materials is very sort of like in your face and piecemeal, and I don't love it because I'm a millennial and I'm like, please give it to me from A to Z. But they find those ones inaccessible. Like a lot of the youth are like, oh, this website is so hard for us to understand. I was like, this is so plain language. It's so great. And they're like, no, they just want these little chunks, and especially like the way they interact with social media, it's these shorts and reels, and they keep educating me on what all these terms are, but they're like snippets. So how can we, if that's the way that they're consuming information, then we have to adapt to present our information to be that way. So that's fun. It's fun to learn to do that, but it is a challenge. And then we also we have one national site that redeveloping is the Families Change. And that's for kids, teens, and parents. So it's a different model for each of those, and especially the kids side of things, where it's like tablet first versus mobile first, and like they don't consume, they just click. So it's everything is like clickable, and how to make things interactive, which is interesting.
Thanks. That's super. I mean, it's neat that you're designing both for age and like medium of consumption. So unless anybody else has any other comments, I'll move on to the next question on our list, and this time maybe I'll start with Jeff, if that's okay. So many organizations are trying to decide when to use digital tools to reach their communities and when to use other delivery channels and strategies. How does your organization decide on the most effective tools and strategies to use, and what factors influence your decisions, and when to prioritize digital solutions versus in-person or print-based approaches? I guess for Jeff, we talked about your organization's focus, but it'd still be helpful.
Sure. There's sort of a short answer to this, and as always, a long answer when you ask lawyers questions. There isn't any, and some of these are my own personal views. There isn't always a perfect calculus to how you do it. I mean, when Nora's point about the shorts and stuff really resonates with me, because anybody who knows me knows I like the gear. I like sound gear and camera gear and stuff like that. But what we're finding with our videos, especially for younger people, the videos we produce, they don't want high tech. They want it. If it looks like it was shot on a cell phone, it's more acceptable to a younger crowd. So when we're trying to, I guess what I'd say to as the starting point to this answer tomorrow is everyone who's on the call on the webinar should tune into the evaluation piece on Thursday, because it's really all about evaluation, because evaluation has to start when somebody says, hey, we should have a resource about, pick your topic. And formative evaluation, deciding what you're going to do is the first stage of that process. So really, when you're deciding whether something's digital or non-digital, that's just one little part of that evaluation process. And I can't stress enough that how important it is to have an overall plan for your resources. So you're not just, doing it off the cuff on every decision that you're making about whether you have a resource or not. And maybe sometimes you don't have budget or time to use to every aspect of your plan, but having a plan, and as who said, Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. What are you trying to actually do? And to that end, we start with a document that we've created, just called a project charter, and that that sort of leads us to keep the development of every resource, and then the assessment of whether it's done what we thought it would do, keep it organized. And I won't go through it in complete detail. I'd be happy to provide it to anybody, or the blank form of it to anybody who wants to see what it looks like. But firstly, it's got general information about what the resource is going to be like, the resource type, a description of it, what the goals are, what we know already, especially if it's modification of a resource that we already have. It'll contain information about what our educational strategy is, what the background is, how we know this resource is, why we think this resource is needed, who the target audience is, what the learning context is, how we think people would best learn about this topic. Sometimes we have more information about that than other times. And then it will contain a section on delivery method, on whether this is going to be a web-based thing, whether it's going to be a postcard, a poster, a booklet, a brochure, anything that's possible, and why we think that's the best. And sometimes it's going to be multiple things. Sometimes it's we deliver things in more than one format, because you're more likely to hit your target audience if you are sort of come at them from different angles. I heard somebody say, an old timer from the PLE world, that it used to be that we produced pamphlets. Some of our organizations, including ours, this is our 50th anniversary this year. So we've been doing this for a while. And we used to just do, puppet shows and print brochures and pamphlets. Now, the experts say, well, you can do short snippets, you can be on TikTok, you can be on Instagram. Oh, and by the way, you have to be on all of them to reach people. So we're all delivering things by multiple methods. And the last thing that our project charter contains will be our evaluation strategy, how we're going to look back during the project and after, decide if the process we used worked, and to the extent that we're able to tell, were we able to reach the target audience that we thought? And the other thing I guess I left off at the very beginning is, when you begin with the end in mind, the first consideration is always what's needed? Who are you trying to reach? And yeah. So begin with your audience. What do they want to know about? What do they need to know about?
Thanks, Jeff. That note about doing evaluation sounds crucial. I think that last workshop that we're talking about on the third day is really helpful too, for knowing what's working and what's not. Holly, do you want me to repeat the question again, or are you good to just dive in?
I can dive in. So I guess regarding your question, we don't usually make the decision regarding how we're going to connect, as it's already decided for us in our remote areas. Can't rely solely on the digital tools and services in our community for the previously mentioned challenges. One of the things that I will like to point out, and I know others have touched on it just a little bit, is that the digital world is not easily accessible to all. And I do believe that during the pandemic, it really highlighted very much that internet access, cell phone access, and digital services were still very much a privilege to acquire. I worked in my previous role at the Women's Center, and we had multiple women that did not have a means to access our center because of that there a little bit of challenge when the world went virtual. Many folks still don't have access to these means. I encounter that on the daily. It's not accessible to many that we want to connect with providing our legal services at the Labrador Friendship Centre, including those Indigenous folks in remote communities, those that are incarcerated presently, and those that are battling houselessness. That may intersect within the justice or legal system, that they just don't have the means digitally to connect. So it's not always to say that we don't provide digital means like that, but we do make sure that our target population that we wish to reach is in an appropriate manner. We keep that in the back of our mind. So for example, for our youth programs, we do rely heavily on the digital means and those little snippets and reels and those type of things to capture overall forms of social media. But for other things, especially when it leads to justice and legal, we know that it isn't going to work best due to the disconnection of those all involved and the ability to access it. So for other things like getting the word out about our legal clinics in remote communities, we really foster the connection with the community. We bring the printed materials that we feel is relevant. Or sometimes I'm caught off guard and I'm jotting down hand notes on a little sticky pad to give out to a client that might need it. So you just kind of got to go with the flow of it. And we know that literacy and language challenges are always in place, as still some are English speaking clients. And that's also with a lot of the elders. They prefer their own language first, which totally respectable, and some don't understand English. So we do have funding for those supportive translation services as well. But keeping in mind that sometimes that's a challenge, as mentioned, with the confidentiality. We also attempt to keep things very minimal so that it's not bombarding with information and a lot of legal jargon. We try to provide it in as easy, plain language as possible. In smaller communities, word of mouth again, and local radio stations, along with other service providers on the ground that connect with community, really helps establish the trust and support that we seek when trying to get the education out. And then to those that we are incarcerated, we also go to them because we know that they need legal support. So we foster that relationship with correction services, which we're happy to have right now. And we go inside the facilities and meet with the clients that need that support and connect them that way as well, kind of as a liaison service. So some of the things, I guess, and like I said, we kind of don't have the option to bring everything digitally as much as cost saving it could be. It's just not an option. So really we hone in on what our target is and what information we're trying to provide, and then just roll with what we have.
Thanks, Holly. It sounds like a lot of it is like based on really concrete, on the ground knowledge about the community that you're serving. Is like what drives the choices that you make. So Nora, do you want me to run through the question again, or you got it?
I think I got it. Some were just about like the constraints and should we do digital versus non-digital. Obviously you're constrained by your deliverables, what your contract is, what your grant is, and also like your budget and your personnel. So it's a bit of like an analysis that we have to run through every time. And also knowing like where you are and doing a scan of the environment, what's out there, who's falling through the gaps, is this project going to help that, and how, to what extent. So I thought I'd just sort of talk about two examples to highlight this. So we run our helpline, our Ask Jess helpline, and so we have it live 3 hours a day every weekday. So that means it's live chat and live phone. And when we're not live, then we have email or text. And we're really busy during our live hours. Why don't we have more live hours? We have two. We recently opened a second person. So now we have two operators or navigators for the live hours. So it's very busy, but we can't afford to do more hours. Like that's just the constraint. And we do have the email and the other the text during non-live hours. We do about 800 a month, and it's about 50-50 between live and non-live. So it's hard to keep up with the non-live hours, even with staffing. So exploring ways where we're using like pro bono students. But we're now looking at maybe implementing AI to help with some of those offline hours. So I don't know. We are just starting this work, and the theory is it going to help people find the questions, the answers that they're looking for, and then it'll reduce some of the time that our staff is using on backlog, and then they can on the email and the text, and then they can do more in person. I don't know. Maybe we just are going to have more and more people using it, and it's actually not going to help. So stay tuned. I'll let you know in like 6 months how it's panning out. But it is a way that we need to. We just can't meet the demand. So is there a way that technology is going to be able to help us? And I think yes, based on other organizations that are using it as well. But at no point am I thinking, oh, we're just going to go to AI and drop our phone or our text or our chat, because we've had these internal discussions with our navigators of like, should we drop chat? Should we drop text? And it's like each channel has slightly different demographic or a slightly different, fits a different need, where the people on the phone, that chat or that email just feels really inaccessible to them. They need that back and forth to like figure out what their legal issue even is and what resources might be good for them. So, or, it really is simply like there's a language barrier or like a real digital inaccessible, it's right there, but they need someone to walk them through it. And so that's where the phone and having a real life person and even that empathy piece is actually helping them feel better and able to take that next step. And I don't know if I have time anymore to talk about the education side. Maybe I'll be really quick. It's like for Indigenous programs, it's all outreach. So we're all in community. We don't do a virtual aspect to that. And we're constrained by our travel budget of where we can go and weather conditions and all that. Yeah.
Thanks, Nora. So I'm going to move on to the last question that we were going to talk. So Holly, if it's okay, I'll put you on the spot for this one again. As technology continues to evolve, how do you see the future of public legal education unfolding? What are the biggest opportunities and challenges in ensuring equitable access to effective legal information in an increasingly digital world?
It's hard. In the evolution of technology, I guess for us, we can only hope that we do catch up and come on par so that all can access the digital world in a way that supports them and our organization. I don't want to sound like a downer, but I do foresee it that it's going to take a long time for us in Labrador to come on par with it and have equal and equitable access for everybody in the world of digitalization. I do believe that when we're talking about even just education, not specifically within the public legal system or anything of that regard, it's unfolding greatly in a digitalized way, and the technology doesn't slow down. It continues to increase. And you see that in youth and how they just, again, want little bits of information at a time, but not to be bombarded with all this print material because that shows that you're out of date per se. So I guess in place of that, I do hope that everyone that we aim to reach will be able to be supported. Even though it's the way the world is moving, I feel like there's always a voice that needs to advocate for other means as well to support those that require the service but can't access the digital world for whatever reason being. I strongly encourage all of you working in this field to be aware that the digital challenges folks face, as I've mentioned over this little bit of time, and look for solutions so that those that need the education and services can connect and are able to be supported. It's not easy. Sometimes it's a headache, but just to know that you've reached one extra person that needed your service is empowering and inspiring to continue the fight. And it sounds cliche, I guess, or whatever, but it really does. And just to know that, I don't know, a woman in need of a little bit of legal support is supported, or an Indigenous person that's facing challenges is a little bit more supported because you made that connection. You help them fill out the form in print form and submit it via fax, for example, because that's sometimes the way that it is. I think one of the biggest opportunities that we can dream of is that through conversations like this, we have a voice to speak to the challenges and inspire opportunities for growth while we aim for Labrador and other remote communities to be fully supported in the digitalized way. And sometimes that includes advocating for infrastructure and funding streams to come on so that those rural and remote communities that are hard to touch sometimes are a little bit more brought on stream so that we're not fighting all the time with our connection to the outside world. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is always those two mentioned already, including infrastructure and funding. There never seems to be enough. So either way, we're forced to be creative, which isn't always a bad thing, but the fight sometimes is tiring. And as the world continues to grow, I don't foresee it being any less of a challenge, but maybe we'll eventually all come on steam and be up to par with what the digital world needs for us.
Thanks, Holly. Jeff, are you able to speak to that question as well?
What if I said no?
I'd be fumbling.
And I've got sort of scattered thoughts, and I agree with everything that Holly said. I mean, the thing that I think about when in response to that question mostly is the basics haven't changed. We have to, number one, we don't have to be perfect. Nobody dies because too much public legal information got thrown out into the world. So if we do something a little bit extra, that's okay. So the basics to me are we have to know our audiences, know who the audience is that you're trying to reach. Remember always that there's a real live flesh and blood person with a problem at the other end of whatever method you're using to reach them. And that's it's the people that you have to start with rather than focusing on the resource. We have to focus on topics that are current and relevant to the public and will be needed. We have to understand plain language techniques and how to use them. We have to think about marketing and dissemination. All the good information in the world doesn't do any good if it's sitting in your cabinet or on a website that nobody knows how to access or can't be accessed. So, and to that end, practice, for lack of a better word, good web hygiene. Understand user experience and readability. Do usability testing. Make sure that your websites are clean and engaging. So that's kind of the first part of it about where I think public legal education is going. When I think about the challenges, AI is an existential threat to any organization in the world that provides information. It's changed everything. And we've noticed it a lot in even just web analytics and metrics right now. A lot of organizations have noticed that web traffic is way down from pre-pandemic levels. depending on the website, for in our case, it's, some of our websites are down 30 to 50%. And that's because AI, Google, and the big platforms are using the snippets that appear at the top of everybody's search, and those don't show up in your web analytics. So your information is being used, but you can't tell how. You can tell a little bit, but you can't really tell to the extent that we could before. So that's the first big challenge, I guess. And also it's an opportunity, ways to use AI to help people. We're not using AI in the production of any resources that go to the public, but we are using it. We're experimenting with using it for translation in a better than Google Translate way. We're experimenting with that. We do use it for some plain language editing and for organizing lists and stuff like that. We're experimenting with those things, but we haven't jumped right into the pool of trying to use it to actually create resources. So there's that. Another challenge that we see that all of how producing it, the kind of information that all of our organizations produce can help to deal with is the simple fact that the world is swimming, as we all know, swimming in misinformation of all kinds right now, and people have trouble telling good information from bad, and we have a role to play in that by being credible sources of information. So that's the opportunity to respond to the challenge. And the last challenge and opportunity that I have in mind, and I'm sure there's a million others, it's easier than ever to get information out into the world right now. That's the opportunity, and the corresponding challenge is it's harder than ever to get people to notice and to separate your information from the information that might be provided by who knows, there's so many distribution channels right now that it's overwhelming for an organization to try to keep up with them all, and it requires producing TikTok videos requires a different skill set than writing legal content, and that means you need more people to do it well anyway. So that's a challenge, and as I said before, the gurus are telling us that you have to be everywhere all at once, and that's hard. It's hard to do that.
Thanks, Jeff. Nora, are you?
Sure. Everything Jeff and Holly said, I agree with. I think I'll start with sort of the negative, the challenges. I think it's a challenge to change the narrative for our funders, because the way that they might be like evaluating us is how many people go to your website. Well, now that's not going to be the way that they should be evaluating it, because if AI is using, or Google Search AI, whatever is using, or ChatGPT is using my information, and it's giving the user the right information and it's answering their question, then it's a good thing that it's out there, and it's a job well done. I'm meeting the objective I set out to do, but I'm not able to measure it. So I'm going to have to change how I'm measuring. Maybe it's more based on just user testing, and then that's sort of how you should measure. And then letting your funders know that this is happening, because they're not necessarily the most tech savvy people to know, oh, why did your website numbers drop all of a sudden? So that's going to be a challenge, I think. And another challenge is that sort of cost benefit analysis for funders too, where, okay, well, you have AI now, AI is costing you a fraction, and you're meeting, the quantity is a lot higher. But now making a case for that in person is going to be more challenging, and making sure that that is really important to still keep, even though, if just on numbers and data, you say, oh, this one is better, the AI for funders. So making sure that you're advocating for in person, because the gaps might keep growing, and we need to make sure that people understand what's behind those numbers and who we're actually serving, and why a balance is needed. And I think it's also like keeping up with advances is a huge challenge. Like technology is growing faster than we're able to keep up with. And then the opportunities, I think like the translation side is looking really promising. It is really, really hard to deliver digitally to many languages. You might get a grant to deliver, in multiple languages, but then there is no subsequent funding to keep that up to date. So it's great. And we've done this a lot before where we have it, and then we have to eventually take it down because we can't maintain it. So it's often that decision of digital or in person. When it's multilingual, I often lean towards in person because it's a lot cheaper to have one individual delivering in multiple languages. Yeah, but the technology for the translation is looking pretty promising. And then the last, I guess, two other points for the opportunities is like AI, it is making it easier for people to understand, like summarizing really complex legal things. And I think we often are trying to hold AI to be like 100%, where they made like 5% mistakes, and that's then we say, okay, AI is the worst. But without AI, this person would have zero access whatsoever. So their knowledge would be at 0% versus at the 95% or whatever it is now. So that's really important to keep in mind, I think. And as technology advances more, there's already, Jeff was saying in Alberta, they're investing in like more access and more infrastructure. So that is a positive that more people are going to have that in access.
Thanks, Nora. I think this is where we talk about moving to questions and answers. We've had 2 questions so far. I don't know if Hannah, you want to? Nope.
Yeah, I'm happy to, yeah, I'm happy to read them aloud, Baird, too, and like let me know if anything pops up in the chat. Yeah, first of all, thank you to our speakers today for engaging in some of those questions. And yeah, we have lots of time for more questions and comments from everyone here attending. So yeah, we have 2 in the Q&A. I'll read them out loud, and then maybe Baird, you can pick, unless they're for someone in particular, we can do the round robin again. But thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Question to Nora. So what are some ways in which you accommodate for those newcomers that are facing language barriers?
Yeah, like I had mentioned, we do a lot of in-person or virtual legal education. And we work a lot with settlement agencies or community groups that have access and work more closely with those individuals. And so even if we don't necessarily have the language in-house, we might have them translating at the time. I think when there's language and we're doing a virtual session, I really like to provide handouts. Even if it is in English, you can always like have, they have intermediaries or other people sometimes to translate it. But that handout is something that lives on. And I know people from our user testing, like 6 months after we've delivered it, that has been the thing that has been the most useful for them, even if it's an email. Yeah.
Thank you, Nora. Does anyone else want to chime in on that question?
I would, Holly, do you have anything, or do you?
You can go first.
Okay. It's the hardest thing, I think, I've said many things are the hardest thing. We get so many requests now for materials in other languages, and we have over 200 print publications. To offer things even in one more language is just, you get the initial grant to have something translated, and then things change, the law changes, you have to reprint, and you're dealing with double the amount of stuff to get through. So it's a real challenge. We're really hoping technology saves us from this. The experiment we've done this year was everybody that you talk to says Google Translate isn't any good. Well, it's certainly a lot better than it used to be, and it's good at some things. we got a small grant this year to translate our new and fabulous family law website from English into French, and we used an AI tool to do the translation, but we went a second step and have a person looking at every word that was written and making sure that it's not just properly translated, but nuanced properly for the way people speak French in Alberta, which is different from Quebec and other places. There were a lot of corrections. It was a ton of work to make it good. And so there's that challenge, and that's just French. And French is the AI translation of French to English is one of the better languages to translate. Some of the other languages don't work as well. So it's a huge problem. And sometimes I think the approach that Nora's saying, like dealing with live people to make sure there's understanding, is a necessary component. No public legal education organization can afford to produce materials in 20 languages. Like it's so expensive.
I'm just going to try them really quickly because I do have a positive, believe it or not, about this. So, as I mentioned previously, I worked at the Women's Centre here locally for a few years, a nice few years prior to taking this role. And we actually have an abundance of an array. So one thing about our area is we have a military base as well. That's what Happy Valley Goose Bay is developed on. So we've had a lot of diversity within. So because again, it's a smaller area, we're able to connect people, and we've sourced some very supportive, prominent folks in our area to provide those translation services, and including newcomers. One was actually our, oh my goodness, member of parliament, not our member of parliament, sorry, the provincial person, the rep at the time, and he actually was fluent in multiple languages. So we just called him up, which if we were in a bigger area, that would be unheard of. And we probably wouldn't even know their multiple languages and what they're able to support. So that's a bonus for us. Additionally, I will say again, like everybody else has echoed with the translation services, it's never enough funding. One challenge that we kind of face, and again, if you Google what Nunatsiavut language dialect is in Inuktitut, it's not going to come up. It's not documented. Indigenous peoples' histories are mostly verbal documentation, not a lot of written. And then again, the other complexity of that is, even though it may be the plainest language to us that are fluent in English, when it translates, a lot of times, even in a greeting, which I've encountered, is not able to be translated in those Indigenous languages. Like nobody walks in and says, "Oh, how was your day today?" They don't ask each other that. So that cultural disconnect is still there. So again, reaching out and really understanding the communities and the population that you're trying to service is equally important, and making those connections and really honing in on the folks that are around you to support you. Like I've mentioned, the support person, they were a great resource to that one person that needed the translation. They were able to make them feel comfortable. So if you have anybody in your pocket that's kind of multifaceted in different languages and able to help, then own them in, take them in, get them through the door. We always say at the Friendship Centre. So that's one way that kind of helps us navigate those challenges as well.
Amazing. And I think we have another question here. Unless Baird, did you want to chime in on anything on that? Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so we have another question which has been touched on a little bit now, but what would or should be our approach to the use of AI to inform people on their rights? So we've kind of talked a little bit about challenges, obstacles, positive, negative outlooks on either side. Is there any sort of approach that folks here would recommend maybe that would or should be used primarily? Anyone want to start? Jeff?
I guess it would depend on the context that have it. If you're using it to produce a resource of some sort, whatever it is, something, have it reviewed by a professional in the area. That's the key thing always with AI. It's great for a lot of things. You want to know how to fix your carburetor? It'll tell you how to do that. Legal terms gets a little confusing sometimes for AI, and you get some wacky results. So that's the key. Have it reviewed by a lawyer or an expert.
Go ahead, Nora.
Yeah. I think, I heard someone at a conference once say that, ChatGPT or AI, it's kind of as good as like a first year associate or first year lawyer. You don't, have a first year lawyer draft something and then send it off without reviewing it. So that's sort of what I think about AI a little bit. So like Jeff said, if you're having it create something internally, then you test it. I know our navigators sometimes use it to help, you know, speed up their search, to figure out how to word something. I might use it occasionally for emails or grant applications because, it's pretty good at that kind of stuff. But I don't just like take it and submit it. You review it, you tweak it. And you have to, it's really good when you're an expert and you're able to verify it. Because there are times where a navigator will be like, "Are you sure?" And then it'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, actually," and it corrects itself. And so to be able to test it is really internally, like that's sort of the key. When you turn it out to external, like to the public, then I think you need to really, really limit its scope. And try to eliminate hallucinations as much as possible. And like hallucinations is sort of when AI will make things up when it doesn't know. And so a lot of vigorous testing to ensure that it's not doing that. And like people who are far more tech savvy than me will know how to create that. So working with an expert that can limit. So it's like it's AI and it's only pulling information from this one website versus like the whole web. So like a website that you can control, that I think is good. And then the last point is like when I turn it to the public, to always have sort of an off ramp to say, "Hey, can I escalate this to a person?" And to offer that, I think is important, though it kind of depends on your internal capacity to do that.
Interesting. Thank you, Nora. Yeah, Jeff, did you want to add? Oh,
Nope.
okay. Holly, did you have anything to add to that? Or okay, just want to make sure. Okay, no worries. So actually, I did have another question here as well, and it's sort of saying Holly sort of touched on this briefly, but generally, how can organizations like ours ensure that digital inclusion efforts are sustainable beyond short-term funding cycles? Maybe if we all knew the answer to that, it'd be a lot easier. But
That's the big question.
yeah, anyone have any
When
thoughts?
somebody gets the solution, let us all know.
I think you can always try to do less. I think we are all very ambitious and we try to solve everything, and there's so much need, but also recognizing that we might need to do a little bit smaller and less things and try to build into the grant this sort of sustainability model. And a lot of that relies on partners, I think, because it's like, if I'm not here, how can I keep doing this? We did this ECE project where we did a bunch of education and we built it up, and it's like, they're so great. Now, how can I continue to sustain this? And I had to like, scale down the scope to be like, okay, we'll do training, build it like less training for the public and more training for the intermediaries. I built that in. It's not perfect. I don't, but it's like a little bit of a thing you can do. I don't know. That's not a good answer, but it's sort of like trying out, testing out different things that you can put into your grant that has a hope maybe of sustainability.
One thing I always think of, and I'll probably forever say it, is long-term funding plans with the ability that organizations like ours have flexibility within adapting. Not that I need to go through 10 channels to change one budget item. If I know that I'm going to spend more money in translation in the future, then I should be free to move some of the funds, say from equipment and supplies, over to translation. I shouldn't have to jump through 10 hoops to get there, but that adaptability doesn't come all the time, and it makes it for very challenging times. And like I said, long-term funding solutions for organizations that are on the ground doing the work, such as this, because ultimately we have to let people feel they know what's best for them, because they do. That's their life. And we as service providers are providing those supports to our communities, for example, and living in there. So we kind of have some kind of knowledge. We're not experts by any means of anybody else, but we have knowledge. So just those little small tweaks within where our funds come from make a world of difference. And again, if anybody else has any other solutions to that, that's a very important question, and I'd love to learn more of other places that are really thriving in that sustainability.
Like, the only thing I'd add would be, I mean, in a perfect world, we'd all have a long-term sustainability plan for everything we did, but it's not a perfect world. And sometimes taking on a project without a long-term sustainability plan can still do a lot of good. Like if you get money to do a project for a year or two, you still might do a lot of good with that project. And then through evaluation, you show the impact that it's had, and you convince funders or other funders to give you money to carry it on. And then also be honest with yourselves when things aren't working. Sometimes you throw a bunch of money at something, because every one of our organizations has made mistakes, and not us though. We've never made a mistake, but that you admit it and get rid of the stuff that's costing you lots of money to maintain that isn't having impact. And then you can spend that money on stuff that is having impact. So it's tough to do that though, because you get a program going and you put a lot of work into it and you love it and you think everybody loves it, but you have to really analyze, is that true? Are you actually having impact with that? Spend your money where it has the most impact, and then funders will want to give you more.
Thank you so much, Joel. And I think I'll take maybe one last question and we can wrap things up here, but I appreciate everyone's answers so far. So I think this is when it comes to, Nora, you touched on sort of the partnership. So this question is sort of along those lines, sort of open to everyone. I guess what have you seen works best? So how do you balance staying focused on a specific goal while still growing the impact while reaching more people? I guess when it comes to partnerships, on what kind of Nora was mentioning. So I guess, yeah, does anyone have any experience on what has worked best on sort of on this note of how do you stay focused and not try to do everything, but lean on partners, but still sort of balancing the two, sort of, yeah. If that makes any sense or resonates with anyone.
I'll jump in. I think my answer is I don't know. We work with a lot of partners. All of our organizations work with a lot of partners. Sometimes it's the answer. Sometimes it's not the answer. It just makes more red tape. Not always. Everybody's got to have a role. I think the way that I would attack that question is the one thing I said about beginning with I hate buzz phrases, but beginning with the end in mind, knowing what you're setting out to do, having a clear plan for doing it, having an evaluation strategy that you actually use throughout the development of something, and you change course if you have to, if something isn't working, and just keep looking at it and saying, are we doing this in the most effective way we can? And evaluation. Tune into our evaluation panel on Thursday afternoon, because those people know way more about this stuff than we do.
Great plug, Jeff. I appreciate that. Yeah, Definitely. Anyone else want to tackle some of that? I know this has come up in our conversations in the past in sort of different areas of sort of when, if, especially if you're a smaller organization with limited capacity, partnerships can be a huge help, especially in this area of focus too, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is a lot more work and it takes up a lot of time and energy that you might not have. So yeah, I can appreciate that.
I think,
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
sorry,
Holly.
go ahead, Nora. You go. I was just going to chime in and say, I think when you're developing partnerships, it's very important to, again, what Jeff said, like keep the end in mind. Communicate that from the beginning so that if it's not working out or if it's getting too, because I've been in both where one organization says they're coming with this partnership and it's going to be great and this is what we have to offer, and then all of a sudden they just flop and you're left with all of this and that's not what you signed up to do. And then I've been in ones that have been great and we've equally shared the work and got clientele engaged and supported. So I think at the very beginning of forming that, you have to have a level of trust and you have to have a high level of communication of what you're really setting out to develop and how have that discussion on how you can meet those goals along the way, if that makes sense to kind of discuss a little bit further.
I think partnerships are just another form of relationship. So anything that is true of like a personal relationship, it would be true of a partnership. It takes effort. It takes a lot of work to maintain that and to reach out. And you have to be really mindful and create that as part of your job if that's what you want for your organization to do. And it's hard to quantify sort of the cost benefit in the short term, but like having a clear goal, having like clear expectations of each other and understanding the capacities and like keeping that scope as narrow as possible, because sometimes it's like, oh, we could collaborate in all these different things and it's just like then nothing really gets done or it's just too overwhelming and that relationship is just frustrating and you're more likely to end that relationship. And so that's a shame. So keeping it sort of like, okay, what can we do? Let's just pick one small little gain and starting with smaller little things actually builds that trust and that like good feeling about, we want to feel good about what we're doing. So more likely to continue to collaborate when you're seeing wins.
That's great. Thank you, Nora, Holly. Appreciate that. And Jeff, I'm just taking a look here at the chat and the Q&A. Looks like we might be done a little early today, which maybe no one is complaining about. I assume so. Maybe we'll wrap it up here. I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. A huge, huge thank you to Baird for moderating today. And thank you, Nora, Holly, Jeff, for sharing your time, your expertise with us, including challenges, successes. We've covered quite a bit today. So thank you so much. Again, concludes our day one of our virtual fair. We really hope to see folks tomorrow for day two with sessions on community justice help, and day three with sessions on evaluation, like Jeff mentioned. So definitely tune in. There's still time to register if you're interested and have some spare time to grab a coffee and some lunch and join us and some interesting discussion. So thank you so much. And thanks for all the positive comments in the chat and for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.